Hi and welcome to this series where I'm going to be going through IT management approaches, methodologies, activities and practices, and I'm going to be giving you the headline points, the base foundation knowledge you need to know. I'll also be discussing some of my real world application of these activities and practices in various organisations. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like and click the bell. Okay, so let's get to it. Today I'm going to be covering off the key concepts in SIAM, so Service Integration and Management. I'm going to be talking around the structure types and specifically going to be focusing on the externally sourced service integrator. Just in terms of the context of structure and what do I mean by structure, I'm going to be focusing on this video around SIAM structures. I'll be doing other videos around governance structure, organization, contract management, license structures in other videos, but this is specifically talking about the SIAM structures. Now there's four common approaches to this, and they are externally sourced integrator, which is what I'm going to be talking about now, internally sourced integrator, hybrid service integrator, which you might guess is a combination of the first two, and then lead supplier as a service integrator. In this video, we're going to be digging a little deeper into the first one, the externally sourced integrator, and I'll be covering off the other structures in other videos. So first off, the decision for an organization, for the customer to decide on the type of structure usually depends on a whole bunch of things. So business requirements. So what does that mean? That can mean anything in terms of people are saying we want better value, or the cost of IT is too much, or the cost of a service is too much. It's unclear what those costs are. Maybe there's an element of smoke and mirrors in there. Perhaps there's a requirement for better governance, better assurance levels. Maybe the quality is not so great, or the contractual situation's not great. Maybe it's just too complex and it's difficult to understand. Maybe it doesn't integrate. Maybe it doesn't all gel together and work well. Or maybe there's a management or a business cultural fit that's just not right. It could be as simple as performance is just not good and there needs to be another way of doing it. Or it might just be it's the wrong mix of service providers. Perhaps there's an element of capability in there as well. So an organization may look at itself objectively and say, in terms of maturity of the organization, the maturity of the teams, the departments, the processes and practices we have internally from an operational perspective are not very mature, or perhaps the resource availability or the skill sets are not so good. So the complexity of a customer's services is certainly a consideration, and also the type of organisation, the sector that it's working in, or the size of the organisation fits into this equation as well. I'm from a regulatory background, and I've certainly seen a number of organisations moving to a service integrator in order to meet a level of regulatory requirements and best practice. The budget as well is clearly another element, the customer's budget. Capability in the service management space generally, so covering current capability, the maturity of service integration within the organisation or the IT team, or the IT service management capability overall, and adoption of. Timescale is another consideration. Organisations will need to look into SIAM as maybe there's a requirement to do something quickly, for example. And also, I've certainly worked in organisations where there's just too many service providers and there's lots of overlap, and it's kind of recognised we need to do something here to try and simplify things. There's too many people in the mix. And then consideration to the appetite of things like risk, or appetite to losing direct control or perhaps relationships with some of those service providers. So if you put all of those in the mix, that's one of the ingredients, if you like, as to how do you select the type of structure. Do you go externally? Do you go internally? Do you have a hybrid, or do you have a lead supplier model? So if we focus on the externally sourced service integrator. So the deal here is that the external service integrator is totally responsible for managing the delivery and the service of those service providers, and they don't have any service provider responsibility. They don't have any ability within there. It's purely one of integration. Why would a customer go for an external model? Well, certainly if you didn't want to increase headcount, that would be a good reason there. Also, organisations that they actually just don't want to take on that service integration role. Either they've got to a point where there's too many service providers and it's becoming difficult to manage, and they're now thinking we need somebody to manage this, but that means we need to start recruiting more people. Or perhaps it's a case of there's too many people in this integration model internally, and it needs to be sort of looked at externally rather than running it internally. There is a high level of trust needed here, because with a service integrator, you're effectively giving the responsibility of managing your service providers to a third party, if you like, to an external service integrator. So there is a trust consideration there, and certainly if a customer doesn't have capabilities to do service integrator, or perhaps they have no appetite to increase them or develop them or acquire them in the first place. So it's certainly suitable for customers and organisations that they don't have that service integration ability, that capability. They don't have the resources, and more to the point, they don't quite fancy going out and recruiting more people in order just to fill that slot. The model of external service provider, you have your customer organisation at the top, and you have your RCs, your retained capability, so functions. Typically you're talking things like governance, oversight, architectural activities, enterprise architecture, any kind of strategic activities, enterprise risk, contract management, those kind of functions. So those are classed with as retained capabilities. And then you have an external service integrator below the customer, and they then manage the service providers that are underneath them. Now, those external service providers can be external service providers, they can be internal service providers as well. So perhaps they're part of the customer organisation. But that's the model. You have your customer organisation at the top with the retained capabilities, the external service integrator layer, and in this case we're talking about an external service integrator that they don't have any service provider responsibilities. They're solely responsible for managing and making sure all the service providers work together and play nicely and collaborate and deliver end-to-end services to the customer. And then you have the external service providers and the internal service providers underneath. Like with a lot of things, there's pros and cons. So if we immediately just kind of flick through a few of the pros and a few of the cons. From the pros perspective, you would say there's a faster benefit realization. So you can use the expertise of a company that's done this before. They know how to do it. They can make this happen. So the benefits that an organization is looking to realize can be delivered much more quicker. Slight aside on that, actually, I've worked in an organization where the customer has very much said, yes, we want faster benefit realization. However, they then took almost 18 months in their selection process of the appointing the external service integrator. So that kind of didn't necessarily add up. That while a pro definitely is that the faster benefit realization point, you need to be aware that a customer may well then take quite a long time in going through perhaps an RFI and an RFP process in terms of selecting an external service integrator. The potential for improved value is another pro. The service integrator can use their expertise, their experience to manage the ecosystem in an a value enabling way. It's more effective. It's more efficient. So they can look at that element, and perhaps there's some economies of scale in there as well. And then separation of duties as well would be another advantage. Certainly in some industries, there's a reliance to be able to demonstrate you've got very good governance, very good oversight, very good coordination and assurances around the service that you're delivering, around your practices, your procedures, your processes, and that you've got proper governance and oversight and metrics and reporting in place. So a service integrator can bring all of that, and that allows the customer organization to focus on what's really important to the business, which is business outcomes and delivery on the strategy. So almost in one sense, the customer can allow to be focused on the strategic element, and the operational and the tactical elements can be with the service providers and the service integrators. Also, another pro is that an organisation can benefit from pre-established SIAM models, processes, tooling as well. So the service integrator may well provide the tool set in order to provide that. The disadvantages: there is a high level of dependency. You are having to trust that service integrator, so there's an increase in risk there. If you think that through, you're effectively not managing your service providers quite so much. You've appointed a third party, a service integrator, to manage your delivery of your service. So there needs to be a recognition there that there is a higher level of dependency there, commercial considerations, continuity considerations, security and risk considerations. There is a risk that this could actually work out being more expensive. So it's really important to make sure you've got the proper hands working on this, and your retained capability from a customer perspective clearly needs to make sure that this is being delivered to deliver the correct business outcome. I've also seen resentment from other internal service providers when moving into a SIAM model, that suddenly they've lost that relationship with the with their customer so much, and that they've been appointed another person, another layer, so they've lost that relationship with the customer, the direct customer. So perhaps there is something to consider there, but also from an internal perspective. So if you remember, the service integrator is managing internal service providers, so i.e. internal departments. Maybe that's an application support department or a dev department for the sake of argument. So suddenly you have an internal department that is being told not by the company itself, but a service integrator. So again, that's something that just needs to be managed, and that's part of the role of the service integrator. Service integrators have experience of doing this. And also another disadvantage would be that the service integrator needs to build those relationships with the customer organization. So don't forget, the old model will have been, there's lots of service providers and they have a relationship with the customer, and the customer has a relationship with the service providers. Service integrator has to rebuild relationships with the customer. But not only that, they have to build relationships and trust and instill that collaborative approach with all of the service providers. That can be challenging. That certainly does have its challenges. But again, if you've got your eye on the end game here as to what is the business outcome, it's certainly something for consideration. The other point, finally, I would say around the disadvantages, and these disadvantages can be thought through, they can be worked through, but it's good to understand the pros and cons. A service integrator technically is not going to be having a contractual relationship with a service provider. So it's really important that the customer must allow the service integrator to act on its behalf. Otherwise, there's no teeth in the model. The service provider perhaps may not accept the authority or may not listen to the service integrator. And certainly I've worked in organizations where the customer perhaps also bypasses the service integrator layer and goes straight to the service provider. So that's something, again, a service integrator, a good service integrator will have experience of managing this and putting the correct framework and governance in place. But bear in mind, this can go horribly wrong unless you make sure that the customer has to be seen to allow the service integrator to act on their behalf. Otherwise, as I say, there's no teeth in the model, but it does actually work both ways. The service provider sometimes may bypass the service integrator, maybe in a situation where you've got the service provider speaking directly to the customer, and sometimes you've got the customer directly connecting into the service provider. But a good service integrator will have skills to address this. A parting thought around structures, and particularly the external model, is around reporting and measuring. So this is really difficult in terms of demonstrating the value of the service integrator. How do you measure it? Because quite often it's non-transactional and it's difficult to see. Sure, you've got a level of quantitative measurement and you've got qualitative measurements as well. I have produced a further video about balanced scorecards that is on this channel, so I do encourage you to go and have a look at that, and that talks about some of the metrics I've used and I've used to show back to a customer the value of the service integrator, and that covers the dimensions of your financial dimension, the service provider, innovation and transformation, customer service management, and collaborative dimensions. But typically you're thinking around, how do you report on showing less noise, less escalations, better collaboration, better governance, better integration, better end-to-end reporting. Perhaps a good way of looking at this could be around the efficacy of structural elements, working groups, governance boards, change advisory boards perhaps, attendance of service providers to these various structural elements is a good way. Or maybe something as more simple as the lead time to acquire a new service provider or the lead time to retire a service provider. All of the metrics need to be business outcome focused. So there's a few ideas and suggestions around how do you measure performance, how do you demonstrate value of a service integrator. I'll encourage you to look at my balanced scorecard video as well, because that goes into a bit more detail. So I'd very much appreciate if you would subscribe and like and check out the rest of my channel. Thank you.